be primarily looking at Genesis chapter 1. And for those of you who are familiar with Genesis chapter 1, you're going to hear what I'm going to have to say today and say, whoa, I didn't know that. And I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of like scratching your heads and a lot of like nudging your neighbor saying, is that right? Did I hear him right? So for those of you who have questions, we have this cue. We have a question and response. We're not going to do it the usual way where we leave a few minutes at the end and answer your questions. You could submit them, and then we'll address them in the beginning of next week. And we're going to do that throughout the whole sermon series. So if you have any questions, scan the QR code, or you could go to your bulletin, your church center, and you could tap on that, and then you could type in your questions there. So I'm already thinking a lot of you guys are going to have a lot of questions, and we want to promote that. Asking questions is a great thing. And some of you are part of the Bible study we're in right now, which we're also going through the book of Genesis. And you already know that there's a lot of information, like a lot of stuff that you have to meditate on. So before we begin, I want to give you a little alert. I like to call it a nerd alert because there's a lot of information that we're going to download into your brain today. Okay? So let's start where we're all comfortable and we're all familiar. The first verse of the Bible, if you have your own Bibles, it's to your left. Okay? So just open up the first page. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, so we're starting here because, and we're going to be spending half of our sermon in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, because, this is the really important part, the beginning of the story really matters. Why does it matter? It matters because the beginning determines the questions we should be asking. Because in my experience, and I'll admit, when I first started reading the Bible, this is like back in the late 90s, when I started reading the Bible, I was asking all the wrong questions because I was bringing in my preconceived notions of what I thought Genesis was trying to answer. But as it turns out, it wasn't trying to answer those questions at all. So one of the examples of questions that I was asking back then was like, how old is the universe? Is evolution true? You know, these are the questions that we bring to the Bible. It turns out the people who wrote Genesis chapter 1, they weren't interested in answering those questions. They didn't even know what evolution was, right? So we ask questions like, how old is the universe? How did God create the world? Is evolution real? These are questions that we ask, and the book of Genesis makes no attempts at trying to answer those questions. Instead, it's trying to answer two questions, and we're not going to be answering it. We're not going to flesh it out today because these are heavy questions. The two questions that Genesis is trying to answer are these two right here. Who is God, and who are we meant to be? And if you want to add a third question, it's what is the relationship of who God is and who we were meant to be? These are the questions that they're trying to answer using the tools they had at the time that they wrote this story. So here's the first verse again. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, now, before we dive in, I have to give you some rules, or one rule on how we should interpret Scripture. Just one rule, okay? The rule of engagement is this. Read the passage on their terms. Who's they? On their terms. This passage, it was written to a group of people a long time ago, okay? And they were using their worldview and their understanding and their whatever progress of science they had. They were using that information and they wrote this, okay? So, one of my professors told me this, and this was very helpful. The Bible was written for you. Yeah, you read the Bible, it was written for you, but it was not written to you. Let me say that again. The Bible was written for you so that we could enjoy it and we could read it and we could study it, we could meditate on it, but it was not written to you. And that's an important distinction, a very important distinction, because the Bible was written to ancient Israelite people by ancient Israelite authors. They were using their worldview, and I'll give you an example of this. If we were to write the Bible today, which we should never do that, but if you were to write it today and we were talking about the beginning of the world, we would probably talk about the Big Bang, and we might even use now we have 8 planets because Pluto got demoted. We'll talk about the 8 planets. But 30 years from now, 100 years from now, maybe there's new science and we discover that there's maybe, what's the other planet? I don't know, maybe Saturn is not, I don't know, right? At the time of its composition is the worldview they used to write the book of Genesis. Okay, so we have, instead of asking the question, well, what does this verse mean to me? We have to first ask the question, what did it mean to them? And because this is what it meant to them, what does it mean to me? So there's that extra step you have to take, okay? So now for real this time, okay? Let's study Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Okay, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And we're going to break this down, guys. We're going to dissect this verse today. We're going to start with the last part, the heavens and the earth. Now, when you think about the word heaven, what comes to mind? Right? When you think about, if you were to just go out there to the general Christian population in America and ask them, what is heaven? What is your definition of heaven? You might hear them say something like this. Heaven, by the way, the word that we read is the word heavens, but here, people don't think in terms of plural, they think heaven. Heaven is where we go when we die. It is a disembodied spiritual dimension, right? Would you agree this is what most Americans, most Christian Americans think of heaven? But as you read in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, it's not heaven, it is heavens. And here's the first Hebrew word, so you could sound smart on Mother's Day, right? You could share it with your mom or mother-in-law and be like, hey, I know Hebrew. Okay, the word is shamayim, and we talked about this before. The im at the end is plural, right? Shamayim, heavens. And what does that mean? It's actually very simple. It means whatever's up there. Whatever's up there. Well, okay, that's the ceiling, but if we're outside, it's whatever's up there. So you look up and you're like, wow, there's clouds and there's blue skies. Okay, shamayim. That's what it means. Very simple. It's not some disembodied place that you go after you die. It's just what's up there. At least in Genesis 1, that's what it means. The next word is earth. Now, what do you think of, or what do you think most people in America think of when they hear the word earth? Well, you probably think of this image right here. This is a photo, the first photo of the Earth that was taken in 1968 by the Apollo 8. Interesting fact, the first picture, they took two pictures. The first one was black and white, and they're like, oh, we should put color film in. And so there's two pictures that were taken about 15 to 30 minutes apart from each other. But this is the color version of it. Before this, I don't know, some of you guys were alive before 1968, I assume, right? Except all the moms are like 26 or 27 years old today. So, but most people, if you were alive, you know that the world, how the people conceived the earth back then were just by maps. It was after this picture that we started thinking, oh, the earth is some this. It was a pale blue dot floating in space. But remember, Genesis chapter 1 was written thousands of years ago on the other side of the globe. What did they think of when they heard the word earth? Well, earth in the Hebrew is the word eretz. Let me hear you say eretz. 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 Yeah, now you're speaking Hebrew. What does eretz mean? Well, it means whatever's down here. Eretz. Ladies and gentlemen, shamayim, eretz. Pretty cool, right? Now, so basically what God is, Genesis 1 is saying is, in the beginning, God created whatever's up there and whatever's down here, right? And the first verse is the topic sentence for the rest of the chapter. God created whatever's up there and whatever's down here. Now, what does that mean? For those of you who are English majors or whatever, there's this term called merism, M-E-R-I-S-M, merism. What is merism? I'll give an example of merism. It's easier to explain with examples. Here is the Amazon logo. You guys seen this before? And you're wondering, like, why is there a big smiley face under the Amazon logo? Well, it wasn't meant to be a happy face, a smiley face. It was meant to point A to Z to show that they sell everything from A to Z. This is merism, by the way, meaning they don't just sell things that start with the letter A and the letter Z, right? Like, they don't sell, like, ant spray, I don't know what, aardvark posters, okay, and they sell everything that is zoology textbooks. Right? It means everything in between A and Z. When they state the polar opposites, they're talking about everything that goes in between. You probably heard somebody say, I've searched high and low and I couldn't find my keys. And you're like, well, maybe you should look somewhere in between. And they're like, no, it's merism. High and low includes everything in between. So, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Merism, everything up there, everything down here. And so what that means is, in the beginning, God created everything. This is what the author means. They're using their literary toolbox, and they're trying to describe that right here. Okay, are you guys following so far? Nod. Okay, good. Let's go to the next part of this phrase. Let's look at the word in the beginning. Because this is the part where I think a lot of people get thrown off. Because when we read this phrase, we start asking questions like this. Well, when did this take place? Can you give me a date, right? How many years ago was this? And how old is the earth? These are questions that come to mind when we read Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. These are all the wrong questions that we should be asking, because the phrase in the beginning, well, when we ask the general American Christian population, hey, what does in the beginning mean? They think that this is what they mean, that on the first day of the universe. And so we're asking, like, when did it happen? Can you give me a date? And there's some people in Christian history who calculated and said, oh, the earth is probably just over 6,000 years old. You probably heard that before, right? Because of the way that they translated the word in the beginning. And there is a Hebrew word to talk about a specific time in history at the very beginning, and that's the word tekilah, which sounds like tequila, but emphasis on the part, okay? Tekilah, now you know another Hebrew word, right? But if you thought the word tekilah was kind of sketchy, the word for in the beginning is even sketchier. In the beginning in the Hebrew, it's not tekilah, it's bereshit. Oh, I thought you guys were not middle hires, but apparently that side of you is coming out. Bereshit. By the way, if anybody asks you, how do you say the word Genesis in Hebrew? It's the word Bereshit. Because back then, they used the first word of the book as the title of the book. That's why the book of Numbers, even though it doesn't have that many numbers in it, the first word is Numbers. That's why it's called Numbers. Okay, you don't need to know that. Okay, so Bereshit, or the root word here is Reshit, because, beginning. Okay, so what does Reshit mean? One of the things that scholarship does is they look at these dead languages and they're like, how do we interpret this? Right? So they look at the context and they're like, oh, it seems like this author is trying to say in the beginning, so it must mean that. But another thing they do is they look at other parts of the Hebrew scriptures to see how this word is used in other places. And as in the last 30 to 40 years, what they discovered is, well, look, in the book of Job chapter 8, if you guys don't know the story of Job, it's a guy who had a perfect life, and then all of a sudden everything just turned to junk, and now he's living, he lost his family, he lost all his cattle, he lost his health, it's just going terrible for him. And when his friends are trying to explain how all this happened, they will often refer to the first part of his life as Reshit. So it's not a specific point in time. It's the season, an undisclosed amount of time. In the book of Jeremiah, chapter 28, they talk about the reign of a king, his first season of his reign, as Reshit. So in the beginning, it doesn't really mean a specific point in time at the very beginning of this timeline. In the beginning means way back when. Not a specific time. It's when somebody says, hey, way back when you were learning how to walk. I'm not going to say, well, give me a specific time when this happened. It's like, well, it's actually gradual. First, you kind of got up and you felt so it was like a season, right? Or maybe another way of using this word, Reshit, is this, once upon a time. Or for you Star Wars fans, it could be a long time ago in a galaxy far away, right? It could refer to something from 1 billion years ago. It could refer to a season. It could have been the first 100 years, or it could be the first 2 minutes. It could be anything. The point I'm trying to make here is when somebody says Reshit, no one asks, so how old is the earth? No one's asking these questions. These are questions we ask because we're very scientific in the way we think, but they were very artistic in the way they thought back then. And so when they look back at the beginning of the story, they didn't think, well, I need to know exactly how old this earth is. That is not the question they were asking. Okay, so, by the way, if you're like, man, this book, Genesis, it's starting to sound less and less like a science book, that's the point we're trying to make here, guys. It is not a science book. It is a theological book that's trying to explain to us the answer to the two questions, which is who is God and who are we meant to be, and what is the relationship between those two things. Okay, so let's look at verse 1 again. In the beginning, God created everything. And so if I could change the words here so it's easier for us to understand. In the beginning would probably be translated as a long time ago, God created everything. Okay, next word we're going to look at is the word created. The word created is really interesting because in our understanding of the word create, we think it means this. We think it means to make something. And you'd be right. That is how right? But here's the thing about the word create in English and in Hebrew. The object changes the meaning of the verb. So if I were to say, I created a house out of Legos, Or I could say, I created a committee. They both means to both create has the same meaning there, but one implies that I took something and put it together. Another one means I organized a group of people. It means different things, right? So, create in the Hebrew is the word bara. Let me hear you say bara. Bara, good. Okay. I heard that participation helps you stay awake, so, okay. In the Hebrew mind, the word bara this is what it means. To name and order something to give it purpose and function. It doesn't mean to build something. It means to give something a function, a purpose. In the Hebrew mind, when you name something and if you order something, that's exactly what you're doing. So let's look at the verse again. A long time ago, God gave purpose to everything. And this is the topic sentence of the entire chapter. So I'll give you some examples here. So that was verse 1. In verse 2, we see the problem that God is facing. And then for the rest of the chapter, we see his solution to that problem. So here's the problem. Verse 2. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. This is an ancient Hebrew way of saying nothing was on this earth. When you hear the word nothing, like if I were to say, hey, before anything was here in this, in existence, there was nothing. What image comes to mind when you, like if you were to close your eyes and think, what does nothing look like? Some of you would think, oh, like a black room, like a void. Other people who watch The Matrix will be like, oh, it's like a white room, like nothing there, right? In the Hebrew mind, nothing is basically just chaotic waters and darkness. That's their definition of nothingness. So when we read this passage, it says, now the earth was formless, and the word formless means it had no function, right? And it was empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, referring to the waters. They're saying, in the beginning, there's nothing. And there's nothing there that had any reason or purpose. It was just waters going left and right, and there's no way any human life could exist in this world because there's nothing that could keep anybody alive. So the problem that Genesis chapter 1-2 is talking about, the world is chaotic and is unable to sustain life. So Genesis chapter 1, topic sentence. In the beginning, God gave function to everything. And then verse 2, and by the way, when the world started, there was nothing. Just chaos waters, and it was just completely dark. But then after that, it says, but the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. So meaning, now God wasn't going to keep it that way. He wanted to do something about it. He could take this chaos and make something beautiful out of it, and he's saying, now watch me. Here we go. Okay, are you guys following so far? The story is more dramatic now, right? Yeah, I love it. Okay, the next part. Here's the first day of creation. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. Okay, well, so he took something and he separated. Now, the next verse is the big question mark. A lot of scholars have scratched their heads on this one. They're like, I don't get it. Why is this verse in here? And this is the biggest clue that taught the scholars what this verse is really trying to describe to us. This is really important, guys. Here we go. He says this, God called the light blank, and the darkness he called blank. Now, for those of you who are logically minded, and I guess you never read this verse before because you're like, oh, I know what would fill in that blank. God called the light light, right? Because that'd be the logical thing to do. And he called the darkness, well, he should call darkness darkness because that's what it is, right? But that's not what the scriptures say. It says, God called the light day. Why would you do that, God? And he called the darkness, he called it what? Night. But that's crazy. Like, we have lights in this room. I'm not going to say, whoa, who turned on the day? Right? Or when we turn off the light, we're not going to say, whoa, who turned on the darkness? Who turned on the night? Like, no one says that. And they didn't say that back then either. So this is the part that a lot of scholars were like, what is going on here? One of the scholars, his name is John Walton. He still teaches in Wheaton College. He's one of the top scholars of Genesis chapter 1. This is what he says. Why didn't God simply call light light? In ancient Near East, light is not an object but a condition, just as darkness is. Light itself is not the focus of this day's activity. See, like, if you think that the point of day one is that God created light, this object called light, he's like, that's not, you're missing the point. Because they didn't understand light as object in the ancient world. Okay? So like they're not, like day one is not the creation of light. Let's go on. He says, if something connected with light is named day, we can deduce that it is not light itself that they're creating on this day, but the period of light, for that is what day is. He continues. In that case, the author intends for us to understand the word light to mean the period of light. Otherwise, the verse would not make sense. This is what he's saying. On day one, he was not, like the purpose wasn't for us to understand that God created light. On day one, he separated the light from the darkness, and he put it here and he put it there. And what did he create? He created time. First day, day one. Next verse. Day one, he created time, or we like to call that day and night. So God didn't create any objects on day one. God, like he's not, if you're asking the question, where did all this stuff come from? That is not what the author of Genesis 1 is trying to answer. That's not the question he's interested in answering. He's interested in talking about, well, who created time? Well, God did on the first day. He took the chaos and the darkness and he ordered it so that now we have something called day and night. And this is why the next verse says, and there was evening for the very first time, and there was morning the first day. Why is it evening first and day second? You know, when we say a day, we say, oh, there was day, then there was night, and now that was the first day. It says there was evening, then there was day, the first day. Because we started with darkness, we started with nothingness, we started with chaos, and then out of that chaos, God created something beautiful called day. That's why he says there was evening, there was day, day one. Okay, so that was first day. What about the second day? What did God create on the second day? What purpose, what function did God give us on the second day? Let's take a look. And God said, let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water. That is confusing. Let's keep going. I'll explain in a second. So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it, and it was so. Okay, so in the ancient world, remember they believed that the whole world was just chaotic waters. So just imagine this is water, right? Okay, kind of like that. And then God said, we need to create some living spaces. People can't live in a place where there's just water. So what he did was he separated the top from the bottom and created like a snow globe. Like he created like a dome, kept the waters above the dome and the water beneath the dome. So there's this space in between. And that's what he's creating here, okay? Let's keep going. God called the vault sky, so that thing up there is called sky, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. What is he doing here? What function is he creating here? What purpose is he giving in this verse? Let's read what Dr. Walton says. Instead of objectifying this water barrier, it's like don't think like on day two he created this dome, although he did, but that's not the point of the second day. We should focus on the important twofold cosmic function that it played. It's like, let me talk about the two main functions that he created on day two. Let's look at the first one. Its first role was to create the space in which people could live, right? God created a space for us to live so we don't have to be in water the whole time, right? Okay. And then the second thing, and more significant function, was to serve as a mechanism by which precipitation was controlled, the means by which weather operated. So now God could allow water to come through that dome a little bit and water the whatever. Right now there's nothing there, but he could water whatever it is, and he could stop it from raining, right? So what did God create on the second day? What function did he create on the second day? Well, he created livable conditions and weather. Are you guys following and tracking here? I know that for a lot of you, this is like new stuff, right? Okay, again, God didn't create objects on day 1 and 2 so far. He did, but that's not the main point. What he did here was that he was creating conditions for something, which we'll find out later on. Okay, what about day 3? Day 3, question mark. What function did he create on day 3? Well, let's read. Let's see. God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let the dry ground appear, and it was so. Oh, dry ground. Okay, let's keep going. God called the dry ground land, Eretz, and gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. We keep seeing that word good, and we'll come back to that word at the end of the sermon. Let's keep going. Then God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it according to their various kinds. And It was so. Like when God speaks, things happen. When I say things to my kids, nothing happens. That's why I am not God. Like next verse. Okay. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seeds according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was, there it is again, good. By the way, in the book of Genesis, the word good is repeated 7 times. 7 is an important number. And then the writer concludes the third day by saying what we've seen before. There was evening and there was morning, the third day. What function did God create on the third day? Let's see. Dr. Walton? From a functional perspective, the soil, the water, and the principle of seed bearing are all very much related as essential to the production of food. So what did he create on the third day? What function did he bring on the third day? He brought ability to grow food. So we have time, we have weather, and then we have food. And you're like, but I thought Genesis 1 was telling us how the world was created, like how the dirt was created and how water, like God took the hydrogen and the oxygen and poof, we have water. Like I thought that's what Genesis 1 was about. It's like, they could have told that story, right? We believe that God created everything, sure. But Genesis 1 is specifically talking about how God took chaos and made something beautiful out of it so that it, in his words, so it would be good. So did God create stuff or did he create function? So this is the issue of physics versus metaphysics. I don't know if you guys know the difference. Physics is like basically the ground, the pieces of wood and the twigs and the piano and the floor and the guitar, like physics, material things. Metaphysics, okay, so if physics is asking the question of how and when did the world come to be, metaphysics is answering the question, what and why? What is the reason behind the things that we see around us? Why is there day and night? Why is there rain? Why do we sail out into sea and in the middle there's chaotic waters and we all drown and die? Like why? Why is nature so dangerous for us to live in, but for some reason where we are right now it's so safe to live here? Like why, right? So an illustration that might help us understand, the way that we look at, like most of Americans, we look at Genesis is physics. The way that the ancient Hebrews looked at it was metaphysics. A better way of understanding this is this: house versus home. What we're asking, the questions that we're asking is, tell us how this home came to be, this house was built. So if I were to go to your house and I said, tell me about your house, you'll probably say, well, this plot of land was purchased in this year and they took some pieces of wood and they did this, and then we used this kind of paint, which is mixed with a mixture of these colors, and we painted the walls like this, right? That's the story of the house and how the house was built. But if I were to come to your house and say, tell me a story about this home. How did this house become a home? That's metaphysics. So I'll go to your house and you'll say, well, you know, we have this mural on the wall because, well, when we first moved in here, we wanted to make this house our own home. And so we made this mural right here. The color here represents this side of the family, and this color over here represents this side of the family. Oh, that big scratch and that dent on the side of the wall. Well, we're trying to move in a sofa and, you know, my idiot husband bumped into it and it chipped it away. But you know what? It reminds us of the days when we had nothing, so we didn't fix it. And there's a story behind it. Genesis chapter 1, okay, is a poem about a loving God transforming a house into a home. This is very important. Let me repeat that again. Genesis chapter 1 is a poem about a loving God transforming a house into a home. It's more personal. This world is tailored in a specific way, and by looking at how the world is created around us, we get a better understanding of who God is and our relationship to him. And that's what Genesis chapter 1 is about. Another mega smart scholar about Genesis chapter 1, his name is John Sailhammer. This is what he says. The author of Genesis intended to draw our attention to God's special preparations of the land as a place for humankind to dwell in safety. This is what Genesis 1 is about. So Genesis 1 is a poem, once again, about a loving God tweaking chaos to create a loving home for his beloved humanity. Right? It's not trying to answer the question like, how old is this earth? Is evolution real? You know, like, it's not trying to answer those questions at all. Let the scientists deal with those questions. Genesis 1 is a story. It's a story that's in poetic form about what a loving God we have. Now, remember how I said that 7 times in the Genesis 1 poem, the word "it is good" is repeated 7 times? Did I remember? The Hebrew word, last Hebrew word for the day, the word for good is the word tov, T-O-V, tov. Say tov. Tov, yeah, another Hebrew word. The word tov, as you guys know in different languages, there's no exact translated word for it, right? Tov means good, but it also has other definitions. And one of the other definitions of the word tov is the word beneficial. God created the heavens and the earth, and he saw that it was beneficial. He separated the light and the day, and he created time, and he saw that it was beneficial. And what that implies is that when God created the world, he had someone in mind. He had humanity in mind. He had you in mind. When we look at the creation around us, Genesis 1 is arguing that you get to get a better idea what a loving God we have. In theological circles, we call this natural revelation. Like the Creator created something and he left some clues and trails, and we can look at the things that he left for us to get a better understanding of who God is. And that's exactly what Genesis 1 is trying to point us to. That we live in a world that we look at and say, look at the sunset. It doesn't have to be beautiful, but we find it beautiful. Why? Because God wants us to enjoy beauty. This is the kind of God that we worship. We have a God who is like a parent. That he doesn't just care about our survival. He cares about us enough to make sure that we actually enjoy life. This is the kind of God that we worship. Genesis 1 is pretty cool, right? All right, so the next few weeks, we're going to be talking more about the things that we find in Genesis, and we're going to learn more about who we were meant to be. And next week, we're going to get a little more nerdy, so bring a notebook if you want so you can take notes. Okay, so I hope you look forward to the next several parts of the series. Amen? Amen. All right, let's close in prayer.